today I thought we might talk about something that I believe is pervading.
Pervading
There's-
or perversing.
yes. So there's a new word for everybody.
Perverting. I think that's a good word. We should lobby for that to be
I think we
added to the
should.
dictionary. Perverting.
Right. Pervading the whole world at the moment. And that is negativity. I think there's like so much negativity out there. I think it's really difficult to avoid it. So I don't know what you think, but I think that'd be a good thing for us to talk about.
No, I agree. I think it's, every conversation I'm having at the moment, there's, this, like you say, there's perverting negativity.
Yeah.
Because it's coming in from all angles, and it's kind of everywhere you look.
Yeah.
Apart from the Eurovision Song Contest, oddly, which is quite ironic.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's everywhere, isn't it? The climate is a negative climate at the moment.
Yeah, and I mean, what's your feeling about why that's happening? I mean, I know we can sort of say, well, it's bound to be negative because of it's bound to be negative because of the Ukraine situation.
Yeah.
But I think there's something more corrosive going on, and that's really what I was thinking about. So
yeah, no, there is, and the challenge is negativity is addictive. You know, we're drawn to it, and I think, the more we're kind of drawing from it, the more it's being supplied at the moment. And not being a conspiracy theorist, I just think we're in a bit of a rut as a race almost, in terms of where we're at.
Yeah, and I think there's for me, the overriding thing that's driving this is political agendas and big commercial agendas. So it's where those two things are coming together at, I don't know what, I hesitate to use the phrase like top of society, but at that like power end of society, you've got really big players seem to be vying for power, and that's then coming down into the media and into the messaging that we're receiving as just ordinary citizens about the things that we can and can't do and the things that we can and can't say.
Yeah.
And it's that sort of thing that I think is creating a really difficult psychological environment for people to stay positive and find, or to continue to think that actually there's real meaning in what they do. So, now, of course, the danger here is that could be just me having become victim of that negativity and allowed it to get to me. So it'd be interesting to sort of know what you think about that.
Yeah, I don't think so, to be fair. I think what's interesting is that some of the more positive stuff that you see, or alleged positive stuff, is also now having a negative effect, I believe, anyway. And you're seeing things like, I mean, this has always been a challenge, I think, with platforms like Instagram and promoting this sort of idyllic, perfect life, white picket fence and all that sort of stuff. And I think what we're seeing, or certainly what I'm seeing and coming across when I'm talking to people, is there's a real divide between that top echelon, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And there's a real envy of and desire to be in that space, but there's a whole heap of stuff that's getting in the way of that. And I just think that it's quite a toxic negativity, and even the positive stuff can be quite damaging now because of that.
I think that's a really good point, and it's definitely a recognized I don't know what you call it, syndrome on social media, the ideal life syndrome, and you get it on Facebook.
So everything's got a filter.
And you get like all these people sort of posting in all over the place. And I mean, let's face it, in a way we're sort of falling into that in what we're doing here. It's like how to have your best life, or how to
of course,
how to get six-pack abs in 2.5 minutes, all that sort of stuff.
But I think that's the that's the difference in what we're doing though, is I think we're trying to arm people with realistic, pragmatic things to do. And it's not about, for us, it's not about likes or, you know, it's about impact, change. And I think that I guess the motive for a lot of this stuff now is popularity, likes, influence.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to be an influencer.
Yes.
And I think that's the difference, really. You know, I think you and I would be happy if, you know, one person sees this, and it makes a change, makes a tangible difference to their life.
Yeah.
Because it triggers them thinking, or inspires them in a way to deal with something that's challenging them.
Yeah.
And obviously, I can't speak for everyone. I'm sure that there are lots of people out there who share that you know, value and ambition. But I do think there is a lot of people now that are just creating a noise, and with everything that's going on,
yeah,
you know, I don't know whether that's just amplifying the toxicity of that. I just feel it is.
Yeah, well, I think this is where I have to be really careful, because when we're talking about something like this subject of negativity, it's so easy to layer over your own perspectives and your own filters. And I think one falling into that trap as I'm about to is one of the challenges that I find, particularly. I've been looking a lot at health lately because of my own health situation, and so there's amazing resources online. But one of the things that causes me to feel negativity in that space is the fact there's so much conflicting information.
Yeah.
But also there's so much out there. It's like, particularly on the fitness fronts, and I know you'll have seen this, you know, I saw one video the other day. It was like, what would happen if you did 100 press-ups a day, every day?
Yeah, I've seen that as well. Yeah.
Have you? And it's like, I looked at it and I thought, 100? I couldn't do 100 press-ups in a week. You know, it's like,
really?
You know, I know. Well, I know. Yeah, but I know I'm not joking, because I actually do a little. I've started doing a little bit of a workout.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm gonna sort of fess up here, in the spirit of openness. At the moment, I can do about 7 press-ups in one, you know, like in one go, proper press-ups. I mean, I've looked how to do them properly, and it's like, get your belly on the ground, get your nose on the ground, and all that. Do it properly. And I can do about 7 before my arms and my chest give out. But yeah, that's coming on the back of having done nothing over the last 2.5 years.
Yeah.
So it's like that type of video, which presents the guy, the massive 6-pack, you know, the massive muscles and everything, is so far away from where I am at the moment. Yeah. Actually, it does not have a motivational effect on it. It actually causes me to feel worse about where I am.
Yeah,
it makes, because it then paints this picture of almost like physical health and fitness perfection. Yeah, and I'm thinking, I'll never get there. You know,
no. Do you think I should take that video down then? Yeah, I think I've done too much damage there. But no, I get what you're saying though, because there's also another school of thought now around sort of fitness, and this has caused me to sort of have a bit of conflict with my own workout. Which argues that, you know, beyond 8 reps is counterproductive, right? Because the amount of energy you're exerting to do the reps after that, you're not getting the same gains. So 8 is the kind of optimum number of reps for any exercise. Right. Okay. And so, you know, that's caused me a question, because some of mine goes up to, you know, 15, 20 sometimes on a warm up. Right. And I've sort of played around with that now and thought, actually, what difference does it make if I just drop everything to sets of 8? Yeah. And the truth is, it's made no difference whatsoever. Right. So, you know, I'm more efficient. Yeah. You know, in terms of it takes less time. Yeah. But I'm still getting the same results. So, you know, but again, that's come from a different source, and so there's so much conflicting information, but. Well, and I think that's the principle behind this. It's the conflicting information, because, okay, we've been talking about health, but you can find that same thing going on everywhere, like in diet.
you find it in advice around business, advice around advertising, marketing, you know, how to, you know, whatever it is you want to do, there's there's always more than one way of doing it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, obviously the big one over the last 2 years has been advice around COVID. It's like, where you've had, you must be vaccinated, and then you've got all those people saying no, vaccination's got problems with it. To the point where, and this is like, for me, this is an aspect of the sort of bigger part of negativity that prompted me to suggest we talk about it, that I'm struggling with personally, is what I'm seeing as an attack on free speech, which is based on governments around the world not wanting to have people putting anti-COVID vaccine messages out there. Now, I'm not going to get into that argument. This is not about pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine, but I have found myself being sucked into a really dark place about the fear, and it's a fear of the loss of free speech. And it's a massive, massive thing for me. Now, you know, I know that we're not totally free to express our views. You know, there's laws around incitement to racial hatred and all that, and quite rightly so. So we're not totally free, and no society that's organized and you know, functions with tolerance can be totally free. There's a bit of a contradiction there. It's like, you know, surely tolerance is about freedom. But at the same time, there's restriction there as well. But this, so I'm being sucked into this negative vortex around what governments around the world are doing to stifle free speech. And it's affecting the way that I'm thinking about my business and what's going on in our business, what we're doing together, Chris. You know, I mean, what are your thoughts around that? You know, what ideas have you got about what I could do to actually get out of this?
Well, first thing is you've got to challenge your own conception, preconceived ideas around what you're experiencing, and you've got to challenge that and come up with counter arguments why that shouldn't be the case. You know, look for the other stuff that's going on. Because we are drawn to negative things. You know, I think it's funny, isn't it? There's a lot of people that think that they watch things like EastEnders as escapism. You know, to almost feel better about their own lives and all that sort of stuff. And what it really does is it satisfies that need for negativity. It's why the news is delivered in the way that it's delivered, because we feed off of that negativity. And so obviously the more you feed on it, the more you then look for it. You know, you become more dependent on it. Exactly. And so you look for it in other sources. So you know, and it operates on a different frequency. Negativity operates on a different frequency. It's positivity in terms of thinking. So you've got to really start challenging that, and start when you start to get sucked into something that you feel is negative, you've got to start countering it with more positive or objective views of it. You see, I know that at an intellectual level, because I've read a lot around this, and you know, when I'm working with clients, I've very often asked them whether they watch these soaps like EastEnders or Coronation Street, you know, or some of the even more extreme ones, and a lot of people do, and because it actually the effect of the messaging in those soap operas actually goes way beyond what you just alluded to, because what it actually creates in the mind, because the subconscious mind does not differentiate between fact and fiction. So anything that goes in, so when you're watching some of these dramatic, you know, personal interactions that go on in these soap operas, and you know, people are highly emotional, they become highly aggressive, volatile, your subconscious is just taking that in and going, oh, well, that's what real life is. Because it doesn't know that you're watching on TV, and it doesn't know it's a drama. So you might be watching it at an intellectual level, like you said, thinking, okay, this is a bit of escapism and it makes me feel better about my life because at least it's not as shitty as that.
But actually what it's doing at a subconscious level is saying life is like that.
Yeah. Well, it's that old thing about life imitating art, imitating
Yeah.
life, isn't it? And that's,
Yeah.
you know, it's a cycle, isn't it? Because
Uh-huh.
you know, the more of those things that, you know, there's always a pressure on that to increase its drama, increase its volatility.
Yeah.
Particularly with soaps, because they all compete for the same audience. You know,
Yeah.
they all
Yeah.
compete for awards,
Yeah.
storyline awards, and whatnot. And of course, what that does is it ups the ante for people and their experience of life, or their expectations of life, and
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
they think
Yeah.
is appropriate, what they think isn't appropriate, what they expect or don't expect.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more that's dialed up, the more we're dialed up,
Yeah.
potentially, as
Yeah.
a society. I mean, that's
Yeah.
quite bleak. I'm being negative now. I need to slap out of it. And there's an
Well,
elastic band around my wrist.
yeah, absolutely. But I mean, this is where this is where actually understanding a bit about the brain and how the brain actually functions is not just useful, it's actually important. So because the brain is actually hardwired to look for negativity, and to such a point that actually you don't have to consciously look for negativity. Like you said, you know, we feed off it. But we do have to consciously work for positivity. And the biological reason for that, the evolutionary reason for that, is it's in sensing the negative, the danger, the fears, the threats, and the things that you should be fearful of, that keeps you safe. So, you know, if there's a wild dog running at you, or a bear, or in the olden days like a saber-toothed tiger, you know, you better work out pretty darn quick that that's a dangerous situation that you need to get away from. And so over the millennia, the brain is hardwired to spot this negativity at a subconscious level. Again, we're talking about this subconscious way in which the brain works. So there's structures within the brain like the amygdala, and that's the one that, you know, is popularly referred to as like your radar. And it's on 24 hours a day, even when you're asleep. So this is why, you know, if there's a funny noise at night, you'll wake up because your amygdala has heard it, even though you're asleep, and it will wake you up because it creates the emotional response to danger.
You've got the hippocampus that regulates that as well, and you've got the hippocampus that regulates the flow of cortisol.
Absolutely.
That can get worn out
if
it's put under too much stress, and then you start to lose the ability to regulate, and you feel stressed when there's nothing going on.
So the whole aspects of neuroscience and the way neuroscience is learning about these ways in which the brain works, I think is becoming more and more important for people to actually know about, because we are so driven by the way our brain works at a subconscious level. I think in a way is, and this you might think this is a bit extreme what I'm going to say now, but I think in a way it's a bit irresponsible if you don't know what your own brain is doing.
Well, I think more so now than ever, because primarily because everyone who's feeding that information knows how the brain works.
Absolutely.
And so as a bare minimum, you've got to understand why you're being fed certain things. You know, why is the news delivered the way it is? Why is, you know, EastEnders and Coronation Street written the way they are, and why do they feature those sort of storylines? And it's and I do think, you know, you just get swept along by it otherwise, don't you?
Well, I can give you an actual real example of that, because you know, when I used to work at the Daily Mirror, and it's quite a few years ago now, but I remember the editors were wrestling with this issue over good news versus bad news. And you know, there's always been a lot of talk, you know, particularly in newspapers, about how they tend to portray news in a negative way. But it's not just newspapers, it's very much the TV news, and wherever news is reported, it's like, why can't we have good news? Why do we always have to have the bad news? So the editors did an experiment, and it was at the time of the Spice Girls. And so what they did was, over a series of a few days, and Yeah, bearing in mind this was a major national newspaper and was selling in the region of about 2.5 to 3 million copies a day. So this was like huge. And what they found was when they ran a story about some so-called, I don't know, issue with the Spice Girls, sales of the newspaper went up between 3 and 5%.
Yeah.
And when they ran a serious political story, you know, which had meaning for everybody,
yeah, it didn't.
Sales went down by 3 to 5% from a base level. So,
yeah.
you know, run the pop and the celebrity goes up, sales go up. Run the serious political stuff, sales go down. And so what that then drove within the newspaper was a drive to celebrity journalism, you know, which you still see today, you know. But of course, there's been a counter side to that in that that then eroded the credibility of a lot of newspapers, you know. And I remember living through that. That was and that has, for me, been a shame, because I think we need good newspapers, and they had a role to play, but I'm not sure we've got them, you know, anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's something in us that we're hardwired to look for the negative. In fact, we don't have to look for it. We're hardwired. We see, we hear, we sense the negative. You know, before we're even consciously aware of it.
That's the problem, isn't it? Because after a while, that becomes a habit.
Yeah.
And then it becomes automatic.
Well, it is a habit. You know, it's like the thing is, for me, what in all the research that I've done around this is like the relationship that we have with negativity is beyond habitual. It's ingrained. It's
like primal,
biologically. Sorry.
It's like primal, isn't it? Almost.
It's primal. It's absolutely primal. And the negative sensors in our brains are in the most primitive parts of the brain. So you know, in the part of the brain that evolved earliest, because that's what kept us safe. And so the thing that I've been interested in sort of actually relates to what you were saying about where you've got to consciously look for the positive. You've got to consciously look for the other side of the story. And those so for me, overcoming negativity is about consciously developing the habits of positivity.
And seeking that as well. You've got to actively look for it, because chances are it's not going to be fed to you on tap like it is negativity.
No.
And that's the challenge.
It is.
The thing is, I mean, it's called hedonistic adaptation, isn't it? Where we you know, we have good things that happen and bad things that happen, and we're in the middle of that somewhere. There's like a default level of happiness. And you know, and that's, I think it's about 60% of our overall happiness is kind of genetic. You know, that's our default, and then the other 40% is it can be manipulated.
Right.
And obviously, what happens is we get drawn to the wrong things to try and make up and create that additional 40%. You know, and it's not. I think it's life circumstances, like the materialistic stuff that perhaps a lot of people see. It only equates to about 10% of their overall happiness, and they get drawn into that. And that's why you get people who then they achieve things. Like I've had clients, I'm sure you have in the past, where they've set a goal and achieved it, and then gone, actually, I don't feel as happy as I did. You know, because it's been a week now. I've bought my new house, or I've got my new car, and actually that's worn off now. And it wasn't really as satisfying as I thought it would be. It didn't really make a difference. To my happiness, or and that's why that happens. And so you've got to. I think it's more than seeking out positivity. I think it's understanding actually what's going to give you the biggest uplift, and seeking that out, and working around, building your life around having access to that when you need it, because you don't always need it. But you know, and this isn't saying, you know, negativity isn't a bad thing. But it's how do you strike that balance and stop just spiraling, plummeting?
Well, I think where you're getting to now is something we were talking about I think the other week, which was like needs, because
Yeah.
you know, what you're sort of hinting at there is the need that we all have for purpose.
Mm.
And so there's so much work around this. So you've got Maslow and
Yeah.
his hierarchy of needs. So at the top, you've got that aspect of purpose, and then Edward Deci, who was the person, he was the psychologist who really coined the idea of autonomy, purpose, and meaning, which then Dan Pink really sort of took forward. And this idea of purpose, when you've got a purpose, it enables you to transcend the negativity, because you have your purpose gives your life and what you're doing a meaning beyond those negative impulses and those negative messages that, you know, we're all bombarded with. And when you don't have a purpose, and when the things that you're doing don't really hold that deep meaning for you, then that's when the negativity can really grab a hold. So how do you go about finding your purpose in life? I mean, this is, you know, we're starting to sound like you know, this is where I think a lot of people start to think, well, look, this is just a load of woo-woo rubbish, you know. What do you how do you make this real so that it's not woo-woo? Because I don't think it is woo-woo.
No, I don't think it's woo-woo at all. But again, I think it's a, you know, it's a really big topic, isn't it? I mean, Sinek's written on it in terms of find your why, and you know, he's talked about this whole notion of why, not what, and attaching meaning. You know, you've got, and when it works, it works brilliantly. But obviously, you get. I think there's, you know, there's differences for me. There's differences between what we do as a. I mean, if we're talking about in a professional sense, what our purpose is, you know. For me, there's sort of three categories. There's a job. You get people who do a job. You get people who have a career, which is different to a job, and they're motivated by that progression. But then you get people who have what I would call a calling. And that's a real, that's kind of in touch with their purpose, if you like, if they approach it like it's a calling. And I think we have a lot of people that hit career and think that's all that's possible, or hit job. I mean, you know, looking back at my sort of upbringing, my parents both had the view that actually, you know, that was completely foreign to them. If you'd have spoken to them about those three categories, they'd have just, well, you do a job, you know, earn your money, and you live to that earning.
You see, that to me, that again, so I can completely relate to that with my parents as well. And I think that's a generational thing, because, you know, my parents grew up through the war, through that, you know, that period where there was just shortage, there was rationing, you know, right through the 50s. You know, that was yeah, when my mum and dad got together, and you know, that was, so the whole idea was you just got a job so that you could have a roof over your head and you could put food on the table. And that was the driving force. And the idea of like purpose and meaning, well, if you were lucky enough to come from like a rich family, you know, and you didn't have to worry about the roof and the, you know,
then you had access to that.
Then you had, and of course that ties in totally with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because that's what he says. It's like
you've got to do that bottom level.
if your fundamental safety needs at the bottom aren't being fulfilled, then, you know, forget the stuff at the top. So, and I think that's a useful place for us to come to here, because actually I think a lot of the messaging that we're seeing, certainly politically in the news, is fundamentally threatening the way people feel about their safety.
The basic level,
you know, and it's everything from the way in which energy prices are going up, and then, you know, you get, that's probably at the most basic level, food prices are going up on the back of that. You know, people are, you know, can I pay the mortgage this month? Can I put food on the table? For a lot of people, we're back at that level, and we haven't been at that level, well, really since the early 60s, mid 60s. So for a lot of people, they've never been through it. So
Yeah.
it's their first time of
First
experiencing it.
experience.
They've never had a period where things weren't plentiful.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do I deal with that?
Mm.
You know?
Yeah. And
So
it's incredibly challenging, isn't it?
yeah.
And the first things that go are the, you know, the top end of that pyramid, if you like, that hierarchy, are then seen as luxury items.
Yeah, and I think this is why it comes back to what I said earlier about, you know, now more than ever, it's important for people to understand how their brains work, because it's like, if you've never had to worry about your base level safety before, you're going to be experiencing a depth and a level of emotion and fear and anxiety. And of course, that's what we've been seeing. You know, how many reports have you seen in all these newspapers and news shows that, you know, we've been referencing about the increasing levels of depression around the world, you know? And we're not just talking about the UK here, we're talking globally, you know. It's like all of these psychological issues are surfacing rapidly, and also I think very worryingly in a younger age group, you know.
No, absolutely. And that's why it is important, as you're saying, to understand where that's coming from, what, and how to counter it as well. To, you know, I mean, we've talked about challenging the views, the negative views, and things like that. And you know, I joked about the elastic band, which is another method, isn't it?
Yeah.
Stopping. You know, you don't have to use an elastic band. You can just like put your palm on the wall or something and just call that a stop.
Yeah.
Just to disrupt that thinking and start looking at other things. But in terms of purpose and finding your purpose, what would you say, you know, is that under threat at the moment because of the climate, because of the negative climate that we're in terms of people actually willing to do that? Do they see that as a risk?
Interesting. So I think there's a bit of a split going on. So I think there's a whole bunch of people who are seeing their lifestyles under threat. They're looking at their disposable incomes being eroded, and the consequences of that for the way in which they live, and that's causing that sort of set of people to think about things in a certain way. And I think there's a lot of evidence to say it's in that area that a lot of these negative psychological issues are starting to emerge, because, you know, if you're really worried, you know, have you got enough money to be able to send the kids on the school trip, you know, when that was never a problem before, you know? If you're always used to having 2 holidays a year and now you can't, and you're a bit worried about, well, what, you know, does that mean I'm no longer successful because I'm not having holidays? Am I not living up to that Facebook, Instagram image of what a good life looks like, you know? This is where it all circles back to all of those forces we were talking about at the beginning. So for me, I think where purpose comes from, it starts from really connecting to what are your values, what are your values in life. You know, it's not what other people expect of you, not what these social media platforms sell to you, whether
they're telling you that you need.
And it's like, okay, what's really important to me, and really working that out. And I think one of the things that always surprises me when I'm working, and I've run a lot of workshops on this, is how few people have ever done that. It's like, and the important word here is like, what is it I really want? You know? So I think everybody has a sense of what they want, but actually you put that word really in front of it and it changes it, you know, because it's like, now you've really got to think, what do I really want? You know? And it's like, only once you've got a sense of what you really want can you then start to do the things that are going to take you in the direction of that. And once you're moving in that direction, funnily enough, that's when you get a sense, and this is my experience, obviously, I don't know, you might have a different experience. It's only when you've worked out what you really want,
Yeah.
and you start to move in that direction, that you start to get that sense that your life is purposeful.
Yeah, there's a great saying which summarizes that, which is, when you know what's important in life, when you know what's really important, everything makes sense. And when you don't, anything makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's generally what happens.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, you're not seeking things to support your purpose. You're trying to make sense of things that are on offer to
exactly
to give you a fix of what you think you need. And it's, you know, it's the most difficult thing, is understanding what you really want.
Well, it's difficult because people don't put the time into it,
and that's why. Yeah.
And part of the reason they don't put the time into it is actually it's a bit scary as well.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you know, I used to do this with, you know, when I used to work with businesses a lot in the culture space, in terms of shaping their culture. You know, I would always be like really upfront in terms of why things like that don't work. And there's 3 reasons why, like, culture change doesn't work. And actually thinking about it, they apply to sort of personal change as well, when you're trying to actually address things. And one is, you don't know how.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's skills or confidence missing. You know, you don't have experience of what that looks like.
Yeah.
That you can't draw upon. The other one is, you're scared, because there's no, you know, there's no guarantee.
Absolutely.
You know? You know, I always used to say that, you know, there's no guarantee for success, but there are for failing. And the number one for failing is by not starting or not trying.
Yeah, yeah.
And the third reason, and this was a really interesting one, particularly with businesses, is you don't want to. You actually don't want to. Like, given the choice, you'd actually prefer to be somewhere else. And that sort of taps into that, doing what you think people expect from you, or, you know, what you think is the right thing, versus what actually you really want to do.
Yeah. So the way I describe that is doing what you think you should, rather than what you actually want.
Yeah.
And that's actually, it's a massive thing. And again, I come back to my parents on this, my dad in particular. So my dad wanted to be a doctor as a kid and a teenager, and his parents didn't have the money to put him through the university and all that. So they basically blocked him from, like, even investigating that. And they said, you've got to become an accountant. All accountants make good money, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, and he was good. He was a very bright guy, and he became an accountant. He was good at it. Although, interestingly, he didn't get his exams. So he wasn't like an academic accountant, but he was able to apply it in the real world. And
did it on the job.
He became very successful in business, to the point where he got an MBE for his services to business. But the price he paid for doing something he was told he should do, as opposed to something he wanted to do, was stress.
Yeah.
And this is why I know so much about stress, because I succumbed to it as well, and I've looked into it. But the stress, the way he dealt with stress was drinking, smoking, acting out, all sorts of ways. Doesn't mean he's a bad person, but it was his coping strategies for stress.
Everyone's got different ones, haven't they?
And the consequence of that was, at the age of 44, he had his first heart attack. And then he had his second heart attack at the age of 50, and his third heart attack at the age of 55, where he had to take early retirement. And I always remember this. He had come back from hospital after his third heart attack, and basically had to make the decision that he couldn't carry on. And I was with him at the house. He was convalescing, and he looked at me and he just said, "Thank God I don't have to do that anymore." So the career that he'd been following for 35 years, from the age of 20 to 55, even though he'd been successful, he was so relieved when he could give it up. You know, and it was difficult, because the reason he did it was safety, security,
the lower levels of all
of that. You know, he wanted to provide a good home and a good life for my mum, for me, for my two brothers, and he did that. But what a price he paid for it, you know?
Yeah.
And so, you know, we can all get a bit airy fairy and say, yeah, you know, it's like, just get on with life and just do it, you know, just do whatever it takes, you know. And this is another phrase, are you prepared to do whatever it takes? Well, you know, my dad did whatever it took, and it cost him. So I think what would be, I don't know if we can do it, because this is such a big subject, but for me, it's like, how do we make all this stuff practical? How do we really provide a framework or around this conversation that is useful for somebody who is perhaps feeling that everything's under threat at the moment, or perhaps is feeling towards this pull of negativity? How do we help them to sort of find the ways of being positive, developing positive habits? I mean, sorry, I know I'm sort of rambling on, but this is a bit of a sidetrack. Something that I realized a few years ago was every single religion that I've come across is based and is rooted in the idea of prayer and positive prayer, gratitude and
gratitude,
you know. And I think there's a reason for that, because these are the practices that get you out of negativity. It's like finding something, whatever you can find, that you can be grateful for.
There's an interesting thing there as well, you know, particularly around religion, is that, you know, religious people, devout religious people, on average, live longer than non-religious people by about 7 years.
All right, I hadn't seen that. Okay.
Yeah, by about 7 years. And there's one is the gratitude thing.
Yeah.
The other thing that goes almost hand in hand with that is forgiveness.
Yes.
And letting go of things.
Absolutely.
That we carry.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that's encouraged through religion. And all religions. And so the combination of those two things is not storing things and building things up, and also being grateful for things that you do have. You know, could add, this isn't me advocating religion by any stretch, but it's because I'm not religious, but it's but I do believe in gratitude, and I do believe in letting go of things. And so 7 years on average is you know, longer than people who are not religious.
No, that's definitely worth looking at. So let's try and sum this all up. So what are the things? And because there's one thing that we haven't talked about that is something else that I think is important, and that's celebrating. And that is, like, when something has gone well, don't take it for granted. So, you know, when you know, we've got the weekly ELA coaching call that we have, the group coaching call. We start that off every week, but it's okay, what have you got to celebrate?
What the wins?
And it doesn't have to be anything big. It could be like, actually, I walked past the cake shop today, and instead of going in and buying the donut, I decided I'd not do that. And great, that's worth celebrating, you know. Okay, I won a new client for X £1,000 a month. That's worth celebrating, but it's not worth celebrating more than the fact that you actually decided not to have the donut. You know, it doesn't matter what you celebrate, but it's like, find the things that you can celebrate. And actually, I do this on a daily basis. You know, when I go to bed at night, I just lie down and think, okay, what can I be grateful for? What can I celebrate today? And that sends me off to sleep in a good way, you know?
Absolutely. I think that's a really important practice that people lose, because we're pressured. You know, we do overlook some of those wins because we're always moving forward into the next thing. What's the next thing on the list? What's the next thing I need to achieve then? Because I can't stop. I can't relax until because there's another pressure on. You know, there's another list. You know, we don't all sit around going, right, my one goal today is to walk past a cake shop. We have several, and we, you know, as you know, I'm particularly hard on myself around things like that. And so, you know, I do sort of think, right, have I achieved enough today? Really, you're not, you know, it's easy to overlook some of the stuff that you have done in view of the things that you perhaps haven't got to or haven't got round to. You know,
well, I think people do that a lot, and I know it can be very difficult. I mean, if you know, if you're running a business and it's difficult at the moment, it's going to be difficult for you to sort of find a way of looking at things positively. If you're, you know, if you're working for somebody and it's challenging at the moment, it's going to be difficult. But it's like, these are the moments where you've got to understand how your brain works,
Yeah.
and develop those mental practices that are going to help you and support you to overcome the natural negativity and the other negative forces that are out there at the moment. And I think right now we're at a time where it's more important than ever.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think just to sort of round up, you've got this practice of gratitude, practice of letting go of things as well. I think it's an important one. You've got this challenging perspective, challenging your views and understanding where they come from, coming up with counter views or counter arguments that are more objective. And again, that's important.
Yeah.
You know, is there anything else?
Well, I think there's, I'm just trying to think, is it worth introducing anything else? Because I think it could all get a bit complicated. I think simple's better.
Yeah.
So I'd say invest some time, learn about your brain.
Yeah.
Right. Understand the practice of gratitude, forgiveness, celebration, and understand that, you know, positive thinking is not some woo-woo, you know, spiritual new age practice. Actually, there's a real reason we need it, and there's a real benefit in actually working out how to do it.